Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about grief, mourning and bereavement. We're going to define each one of them and talk a bit about cultural differences. But before I start, welcome to my channel. I'm Anastasia and I'm a psychologist. If you care about mental health, like me, you can subscribe and explore with me the mystic world of human psychology. I think this video is very relevant, especially now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Many of us have lost loved ones, and all these words, grief, mourning, bereavement, rituals, are all words we've heard a lot this year. So I will define these concepts. I just want to make clear that a person can grieve for many reasons. You can grieve for losing a house or a job, for breaking up with a partner. But this video is going to be about grief after the death of a loved one. When we lose a loved one through death, we are in bereavement, or else we are bereaved. Now, grief is the mainly emotional reaction to bereavement. Grief is complex, and apart from an emotional element, it entails a cognitive, a physical, and a behavioral element. And I will give some examples for all these four domains so that you know how to identify signs of grief in yourself or others. Emotionally, grief might mean sorrow or loneliness or guilt or yearning and longing for the deceased. Cognitively, grief might manifest as hopelessness or as a difficulty concentrating, difficulty making decisions, or it might manifest as an intense preoccupation with thoughts of the deceased. That means you may be thinking a lot about the person you lost or how they died. Physically, a person that is grieving might have headaches or loss of appetite or difficulty sleeping, or even be more vulnerable to illnesses. Behaviorally, a bereaved person might be withdrawn or unwilling to engage in normal professional, recreational, or social activities. And I want to point out that all these reactions I mentioned most of the time are normal and expected. So if you are in the moment of your life when you are grieving, don't be afraid if you're in a lot of pain. In his poem Separation, William Stanley Merwin says, "Your absence has gone through me like thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its color," showing exactly that when you lose a loved one and you're the person left behind, this can influence you in many ways and across different domains. Grief brings a lot of suffering to the people experiencing it, so you don't have to be afraid if what you feel is awful. However, if you think that your pain is too intense and it goes on too long, and by too long, at least in the Western world, we mean more than a year, then maybe you can consult your worries with a mental health specialist if you think this is something that might help you. There is another concept I want to touch upon, and this is mourning. Mourning is how people show their grief to the outside world through rituals like funerals, through actions, practices, and mourning is influenced by third parties, so society, societal expectations, religion, and culture. That means that when and where you live can influence tremendously how you grieve. For example, in Greece, when we lose a loved one, we wear black clothes for weeks or months, while in India, a widow has to wear white for the rest of her life. Another very interesting example is that of Japan. There, when people lose a loved one, the connection between them is never lost. They keep leaving objects and even food or water or cigarettes. So we see that this is their way of dealing with their grief. On the contrary, the Navajo Indians of North America are allowed to mourn their loved ones only for some days. After that, they can't even talk about them because it is thought that this might harm their spirit in afterlife. Something I also find very interesting is that people that believe in the same religion don't grieve necessarily in the same way. So, for example, Egyptian Muslims show intense grief while Muslims in Bali don't. They avoid showing signs of grief publicly, like crying. And I'm mentioning all these approaches because I want to show that we all grieve differently, and that depends, of course, on our personality, but also on when and where we live. I'm very curious about other customs and rituals around the world, so you can comment if you feel like it and let us know how is it in your country or religion or family. Is there any specific ritual or mourning custom you have? If you learned something from my first video, you can subscribe and like the video. And let me just say, I'm truly happy you care about mental health. See you in the next video where I'm going to talk about dealing with grief after the death of a loved one. Bye!